Alright, so we're at 144 BPM, pretty fast right off the bat, and the first sound is the rumble kick. Now this is the standard style of like rumbly bass kick that you hear in the style of techno. Now the thing to keep in mind here though is that it's actually a little bit of a different way of doing it, because typically you would create your rumble off of the kick. Like you would have your kick, and then you'd either have like some reverb or you'd have another kick which is going 16th notes like that. But the way we're doing this here is actually using a tom sample. And the reason why is because you can hear the tom just has like a really nice, kind of more rumbly feel to it. So all it's doing is it's just playing 16th notes, and then it's being sidechained to the kick. And then I have an EQ, and it's being converted to mono. But yeah, like I said, this is actually a different method than I've ever shown you guys before, because typically, again, we would do this like, you would have your kick doing this. Now the reason why we're using this bass tom instead of the kick is because I actually tried it with the kick, and you can hear like the kick, and you just don't get that same kind of like softness that you get with the bass tom. And it's also the contrast between the sounds. You know, if we just use the same kick that we're using to do doom, 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 you're not really going to have that thing where, you know, it's two very different textures being combined into one sound here. And the last reason is really just like, the tom just has that right kind of texture to it. You know, it has the ambience and the mid-range. And it just feels right. And that's something that you want to keep in mind. Like, when you're creating these kinds of rumbles, it's essentially just about, like, you know, getting the right feel more than anything. Don't be afraid to use different samples. It doesn't always have to be a kick. It could be a tom. It could be, like, any percussion. It could be really almost anything, as long as it has that low end to it. Now, for the main kick, what we're doing is I'm layering two kicks together. So we have this one, and then we also have this one, which you can hear is more like a 909 style kick. So here's without that, and then with it. You can hear why we do this. You know, it really adds a lot of like punch and fatness to the kick. And then on the group there, the only thing that we have is actually just a bit of compression. So here's without it, and then with it. So you can hear it just kind of evens these out a little bit. I'd actually probably do a little bit less. You know, it just kind of puts them like in a more even place, and it really helps with these kind of rumble kicks, like especially in this style of techno, because you really want that like that bass to be as loud as the kick. It's not like other styles where you're gonna have this big doom doom doom, and then the rumble is kind of like quieter underneath that. Here you need them to be a little bit more even, so compressing them together can really help to get that. And then we have this Reese. So it's a really simple progression. It's just doing D sharp, F sharp, and then E. Just very straightforward. But then we have all these notes up here that it's bouncing up to, and all these are just octaves. So you can see there's an octave of D sharp. There, so that's actually not one of the notes. That is a C sharp, but it's still in the scale because, you know, we would have like you can hear it still fits in there. So it's pretty simple notes, so just all stuff from the same scale that we're working in. That's just an octave of E there, same deal with that. But yeah, just kind of like adding some extra cool stuff up there, so it's not just with nothing else to it. But the sound, this one's made with wavetable. So we have two saw waves here, you can see. They're detuned a little tiny bit. The second one is a little bit quieter as well. And then the only other thing actually going on inside of the synth here to show you is, you can see we have this in the mono settings, so it's doing that glide like you heard. And then also we have the unison. It's on the shimmer mode. So you can hear that. Then after that we have this audio effect rack. And this is actually doing a bit of multiband distortion. So here's without this. And then with it. So you can hear that it's like really not too intense, but by doing this multiband, we're able to kind of get a little bit more control over the sound, so that, you know, it's not going to be so much. Like if we just drop this pedal on everything, it changes the sound so drastically that we can't really use this. But if you just put it on the highs, and then you can start the mids like this and the lows like this, you can see, like, you know, it's not actually going to be that distorted. It's just going to change the texture of the sound. And that's really what we want. It's a way to kind of take this very, you know, straightforward sound that's used a lot, a respace is, and kind of make it your own with this. So you can see the distortion really just depends on which band it is. Like we have the low end. It's just going through that bass amp. So, you know, not really too much, but still giving it some texture. The mids are going through this rock amp. So you get that really nice, juicy mid-range. And then for the highs, it's just super crispy from this pedal here. Again, without this rack and with it. It's just a really great way to make your bass like this feel really full sounding, and also make it your own and give it a more unique texture. Then we just have some drum bus, which fattens the sound a bit. We have a compressor, which is side chaining into the kick. A high pass filter, which cuts out the low end so it doesn't actually get in the way of the bass. And then this EQ here, which is just sort of focusing the sound a bit. And cutting out a little bit of mud there as well. Because with this, like, we already have enough of that frequency happening with this bass tom. If I turn this EQ off, you can see this thing kind of clashes a little bit more with the bass tom. But this way, they're kind of each in their own place. Then we have this main pad. So this is really just kind of using some notes that we've already used here, where you can see we have D sharp, E, and F, the same notes from the bass line. But then we're also adding in this A sharp, which is just a fifth of D sharp. And you can hear what this adds to the track musically. Now, something to keep in mind here is that you're going to have this change notes every time the respace changes notes, basically. Like, even if they're not playing the same note, it needs to sound like it's kind of like playing the same. Like that, where it's like, you can always count on every time the respace changes notes, this is going to change notes as well. Even if it's not the same note. That's a big part of the programming here. Now for the sound, this one is actually this pretty simple wavetable patch, where you can see what we're doing is we actually just have an LFO on the position of oscillator 1, and then it's just moving that. So we're switching from a square wave to a saw wave to a triangle wave to a sine wave there. And yeah, you can hear it creates this cool kind of morphing texture. And then the only other thing going on there is we just have a bit of unison. And then I have some chorus, which you can see is pretty wet. There's not that. And with it. And then we also have a bunch of reverb. So when you make the reverb 100% wet like this, it can actually give your synth a really nice texture. If I turn that off, and then turn it on, you hear how it's like really washing it out and just making it kind of disappear into this like nice kind of watery texture. Then we just have a compressor, side chaining this to the cake, and then a high pass filter. And then we have this second pad, which this is literally just playing D sharp, E, and C sharp. And you can hear, you know, that's just meant to play over top of that respace. So this one is made using wavetable as well. You can see we have 2 saw waves here, detuned a bit. And then we're using this noise unison. So that's what gives you that like really chaotic kind of like almost like buzzy, like it's almost like a hard style lead. You guys know what I'm talking about. But that's how you get that. It's saw waves with the noise unison. And then we have that going through some reverb, as well as a bit of drum bus, which is fattening it up and just kind of making it a bit more full and more raw sounding. It's being sidechained to the kick, and then finally it's just a little bit of a high pass filter to make sure that's not going to have anything in the low end. And then the last synth here is this little vocal stab, which you can hear. So this is kind of like call and response with that last sound, where you get this one and then this vocal stab. It's kind of like they're switching off like which one is going to be the lead there. And that's something you want to keep in mind, you know, it's not just like what instruments you're using and like what notes they're playing, but also like how it all fits together, you know, having like this is our main sort of groove, and then these two things are the leads, and it's all about the dynamic between all the different elements. So for the notes, this one is playing, basically you can see it's doing this D sharp, E, an F, or an F sharp. So the same notes that I was telling you about with the bass line. And then it's also just jumping down to this G sharp here, which is actually the 4th of D sharp. But yeah, it's almost like a very like 90s kind of like gabber, hard techno style pattern. That's how you write those. It's like the 8th notes. And then also the sound. So the sound is this classic vocal stab. It's used a lot with the style of like very kind of bouncy, fast 90s hard techno melodies. But then what I've done here, so I've put it into a sampler. That's how this works. You know, you just use it in a sampler. In this case, I'm using Ableton Simpler. But then you can see I've actually shortened the amplitude envelope. It's a little bit more plucky. If I turn that back up, you can hear you don't quite get that same like burp, 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 burp. So you want to make sure you do something like that. Then we just have some chorus and a bit of reverb, and then finally just a compressor sidechaining into the cake, and that's it for the vocal stab. So the next thing here is the ride. You know, it's just doing that standard like that. And then I just have this going through my Ultimate Stereo widening rack, which I'll show you what this is doing. Basically what this is doing is this actually kind of like I showed you before with the multiband distortion. It's like a multiband widening. So we have the low end not getting anything, the mid range is getting spread out a little bit, and then the highs have the Haas effect on them. This without that, and then with it. And I'll also put a high pass filter on this, just to make sure it's not going to clash with the low end. Then we have this rave loop, which I put together here. So it's 4 elements. It's these shakers. You know, very energetic, like old school style. And you can hear when you put those together, you get this even more full sounding and energetic loop. And then we have these delay percussions. If you can hear those, I'll play this with the kick so you can really hear how that works. So it's just creating a nice kind of like background percussion loop. That's just going through some delay and some drum bus, and then finally we just have this little closed hi-hat, which is actually pretty important. If I turn that off, you can hear it's missing a lot of energy. And then on the group of those, all we have is just a bit of a high pass filter, and then I'm compressing these together as well. And that's just a good way to get that more like kind of polished, like, you know, hard techno, like very like kind of full sounding thing. Because if you just play these side by side, it works. But then when you compress them together, it makes them feel like they're kind of all in that same place together. Then we just have this 909 hi-hat. You know, pretty standard hi-hat there for hard techno. Nothing too surprising. And then we have the background sounds. So, the first two here are just these little micro freak effect samples that I have. Those are actually from this synth right here. Yeah, pretty sure you can still hear that. So, that is the Arturio Micro Freak. It's a synth that I've been using for a little while now. And it's just a good way to generate these kind of like little background sounds like this. So what I've done is I've just taken one that I recorded previously and I just chopped it up. So these are really just kind of like for the intro, you know, like you would have like maybe your kick. And then having those like constant effects are just going to add a lot of movement there to the background in the track. And then also this little vocal here. So that's another one that's just going to kind of fill out the background there. Especially in the intro where you don't have all your main like melodic stuff. Like when all this stuff is not happening. Yeah, that's where these shine. And they're important for the background of the track too. Like you really want to make sure you add this stuff. If you forget this stuff, your track is not really going to work quite the same. And the last thing down here is just this little vinyl noise. So that's just going through a low pass filter, which is just kind of, there's without it. And with it, kind of brings out that like crispiness. And then I have this being sidechained to the kick. And yeah, so that's going to be it for the vinyl noise, and that's also going to be it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get this full project file, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is available right at the top of the description on my Bandcamp. This is a really great way to help support me as well, guys. I don't make a whole lot just off of the YouTube videos, but with these sample packs and different things like this, I'm able to keep going and keep bringing you guys new videos every week. And yeah, so thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.